And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're at in the world today. It could be any one of the 190 countries we have touched. Today, I am at the Pagan. I'm going to talk about the differences in the conflicts that we're facing. The United States feels very much like it's changing a lot. And it is, there's no question. And that we're coming to the end of an age. The things that I've been watching, silver and gold. Silver is our most valuable metal. And people, I'm going to tell you, save your pennies. Send them to me if you don't want to. I'll tell you why more later. But save your coins, not just the silver ones, not just the gold ones, all of them. Okay, having said that, I'll explain more. But the real argument is that we're seeing, we're having governments cracking down on illegal immigrants, as they are calling them, non-documented workers. There's no such thing as an illegal human being yet. And that's, we've got to come to an understanding of what real human rights look like, what it is we're going to respect, what are we going to do to make people better. Can you imagine? That's the real test of things, isn't it? At least that's how I feel. I believe in freedom in the First Amendment. On February 17th, I will be teaching a class called First Amendment for Pagans. And it's not as straightforward as it sounds. But tonight, I'm going to lay out what's happening. So we're having a crackdown. People have called it oppression. People have called it acts. And while they are talked about, they're still legal, even if they're acting illegally, until somebody stops them, until we can charge them. They can be acting illegal, but until we start charging them and things like that, this is still legal action. And also, the President of the United States, President Trump in this case, is an elected official that we chose to put into office. Regardless of any of the mechanisms, he is the legal holder of that seat. Now, if his actions are illegal, we are supposed to have systems in place to kind of curtail that seem not to be working as much as people would like right now. This is the hardest part of it. So everybody says we're heading for civil war. We're not. If this were all what it is this is a corrupt, legitimate government, and we oppose it. That's called a rebellion. The government will call it an insurrection, but according to the Declaration of Independence, the way we would look at it would be a rebellion against an illegitimate government. Even if it was legitimately elected, it would be a rebellion, while they would call it an insurrection. So that's a very thin line. So are you going to be part of the rebellion? And the idea of a rebellion is this. You are to return the government to law and order and restore it to its original foundations, or whatever foundations it was chosen. That is a rebellion. So when people talk about civil war, it's a very different thing. And I'll tell you why in a minute. But understand, a rebellion is against a legitimate or a government that has gone illegitimate. They can no longer stand because it is no longer staying inside the law. So that's a rebellion. Isn't that fun? So, okay. And the other people are saying that we're at civil war. We're not at civil war. But in order to have a civil war, you have to have a major disagreement of who is the legitimate source of authority. That's why we talked about rebellion. So until we have like an election, we know who has legal authority. So to be a civil war would be, do we have a leader that we have chosen that we believe is the legitimate president of the United States? One of the reasons why we're seeing a lot of activity on elections is that the United States is facing who we always will accept, whoever is the legitimate winner of elections. Throw that into that. You can only have a civil war, right, when you have a leadership or another government in place, or another society or group together that wants to be legitimized. What's happening in Venezuela? The opposition leader won the election by leaps and bounds, got a Nobel Prize, etc. But the government that's staying in is illegitimate. Even the one that is there now is illegitimate. The election, and nobody's supporting the election. Unfortunately, that's how it works sometimes. And they're technically in now a civil war because there's a question about legitimacy. The United States does not have a question of legitimacy of who's in charge. During the Civil War, the southern states said, no, we're no longer going to pay attention to you, Abraham Lincoln. We're going to pay attention to you, Jefferson Davis. So even there, that's what made it a civil war. We are no longer going to have them, and we have another government to replace it with. That's why I tell you they're going to try calling a constitutional convention. Yep, that's right, a constitutional convention, because it throws out the Constitution immediately. It's kind of being there, and then we can start arguing over it. We don't even know how to call one together, which is going to be very interesting. I mean, we don't have a legitimate process for that. That's a disruption. Okay. So why is this a holy war? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, this is not Trumpism right now, fascism right now. I left it on the table because I was going to move around. So I'm going to move around in my apartment to go get it. Yes, I live in a very nice little space. Actually, not mine, my friend Dan's. Okay. What we're facing is a holy war. What do I mean by that? It means that we're facing a continuous conflict originating in the minds of Christian Dominionists, Christian fantasists, Christian soldiers. We're taught every day that we are onward Christian soldiers. Remember that song? I was taught it. And was it just hyperbole or was it conditioning? One of the longest aspects of this is that we've been at war, as the Holy War in America has been on for a very long time, since the days of Nixon. And what I mean by this is that they go after one after another, trying to create a Christian nation, to make it that it was always Christian nation. They're trying to control history. There are 7 things that they need, and 7 mountains. And I've gone over these before, but they include education, religion, entertainment, family, government. So in each of these places, they try to take over and dominate those fields. They have now succeeded at having some domination in all 7 fields. But this has been a long time standing. This isn't started today. Trump is the catalyst that has allowed it to progress very fast. Absolutely, in my opinion. But this has been a continuous process, and I will explain to you. It's been since the days of Nixon. The idea of never losing an election again to the Democrats or these progressives, the civil rights actions and all these different things. They began this sort of moral majority, the idea of, the moral majority. They created this idea that the majority of Americans were moral, and and they defined what that morality is. And that was the early evangelicals. Those were them. I'm not even going to mention them because I'm not interested in it, and I'm not going to try to trigger the algorithms. But we know them. The silent majority. They were there, and they went against abortion, even though it was never really an issue in the church. That was between people and medical. Before this, it wasn't. But then they made it an issue, so they can have this sort of Christian moralism, pro-life, anti-life, and so that sort of thing. The drug war. Nixon, and it's in the paperwork, and it's legitimately there, wanted the hippies and the blacks, right? And use less defined terms, to be able to be arrested and stopped because they were fighting the anti-war, fighting the government. They were disrupting, and that started the war on drugs. It wasn't a issue of public health. It wasn't any of that. It was an act against these organized people so they can be delegitimized. And they're going to use the same method, and they're using the same methods. This has never been new. What's happened is that it's now switched to be more aggressive. And people are starting to stand up, and people are there. And because Americans are more moral today, they are more ethical, more caring, more empathic. You can say a lot of things. But as the church has been rolled back, and as authority has been rolled back, and you see so many legitimacies of so many of what was fringe. And we can go over all of them. Isn't it great? They're all coming in, and the voting came in, um, that we constantly moved towards this sort of equality, opportunity, these challenges. And we started seeing these magnificent minds that were not of the narrow pre 1950, pre 1960 image of America. America, yeah, people forget it was 85% white just in like 1984, 85. And that's when Reagan really opened up the throttle and figured, try to do things. I mean, we've always held to deal. We need labor. It's it, but there we go. So a holy war is different in that it doesn't need one king. It can have several kings. It can have that sort of thing. But it comes down to a triumph. Remember, Christianity is monarchical. King of kings, Lord of lords. And it's basic spiritual models that we must submit to an all higher authority. Now, where does that authority lie in the human world is part of the argument. But no matter where you are in Christianity, you are to accept, except from some Gnostic groups, you can argue me into minutia. But the American Christian, the good ones, the bad ones, the annoyed ones, the ones that give lip service, and they're the ones that don't know they're Christian because they just live that life. It's King of Kings, Lord of Lords. Jesus Christ is the Lord of the world. And that's where this movement is coming from. Now you say, oh, it's just Trump. No. I will now explain to you. We've already explained Nixon. Reagan, the silent majority, the Christian evangelicals were mad, really mad that he turned down for good governance. I mean, good, bad, or otherwise, he did turn down the Christian evangelicals pretty hard once he got into office. And we're fortunate. He gave them some room. We talk about Jimmy Carter. He was a man of faith, and he didn't push backwards. People were pretty happy with it. You got into then, the next one, which was, of course, Clinton. And Clinton had all sorts of faith-based initiatives. We saw it was under him, the Veterans Act was, we seen it, that there was a lot of pushback. In 84, there was the Hemsley events, which was the biggest one, which was they were trying to make the IRS not able to take Wiccan and pagan churches and other types of laws. But when you get into Clinton, you get into the same thing. He was very Christianized, and he spoke of it, and his behavior wasn't. He went to churches and he talked well, Martin Luther King and all that. And the pagans, and I'll go into another show. When I do my February 17th First Amendment class, I'll go over some of the real things we went through during Clinton and then Obama. Oh my gosh. Bush had the faith initiatives. So we've always had these faith initiatives in the very pro-Christian aspects of our government. Every president has. But this battle we're in today, this is a book that most of you have never seen. I guarantee it. There's very few copies of this. Right? And it's basically Creating a New Civilization, The Politics of the Third Wave. The Third Wave is another book by Dr. Alvin Toffler. He included his wife, Future Shock, you've heard me talk about, and a foreword by Newt Gingrich. 1994. And this book is the blueprint to overthrow our civilization. And Newt Gingrich changed the way the House worked after this book. And that was, very simply, to turn all the House elections into national elections. This was no longer about your neighborhood because we're in pretty good shape. We were healthy. I mean, there's a lot to be said for the economy. So they were able to change and transform the Republican movement into the House by making it a national. We're going to change the national law. We're going to contract with America, which is more of that. So a holy war is relentless. You talk about, and I'm going to bring in the next piece, spiritual warfare. If you ever doubted that we have it, I can show you all the laws, and I can show you what we fought back against, and I can show you all of that, legal stuff. But I am going to explain where we have conquered. I will talk about that in a minute. But where we function from. We've been able to increase our numbers. We've been able to have more of our rituals. We've had more of our things as it goes on. And now we can start talking about having a campus. In Danville, Illinois, and I'm being very public about it, we can go ahead and talk about having a campus. 3-year build, we're working on it, and we'll talk about the library and everything else. But why do we want to do this? We want to continue to have freedom of speech. And you can't have freedom of speech unless you have freedom of information, freedom of knowledge. And this is what makes this a holy war. They don't want to just control the government. They want to control what you read, what you watch, everything about how your brain is programmed. That makes it a holy war, and it's relentless. If Trump disappeared tomorrow and Vance took over, we'd still be facing the same thing. We vote out this party, and depending on the mood of America, they may accept it and pull back and hide behind the good Christian movement, one of the most diabolical tricks of Christianity, this duality of the good Christian versus the bad Christian. The good Christian acts as a shield, a living, breathing shield against the bad Christianity. And the bad Christianity knows how to manipulate the good Christianity enough so that it will agree with them the majority of the time and give them enough cover when they pull back that they can join these good Christian churches and hide. They do it over and over again, historically. So this is what the holy war is about for them, the spiritual warfare, praying against God, throwing out the devil, and they want to control the basic communication. This isn't about, they don't care if you rebel. They'll call it an insurrection and shoot you. They don't care if you call it a civil war and you think they're a legitimate government. And when can that happen? I think it can happen. I think it can happen basically after we have another election. I think this year, we're wrestling, we're having tensions. I don't think we can have a civil war until after the elections. If Trump doesn't allow for the elections, then you have a rebellion to restore the legitimacy of the government. If we do have elections, it can be highly contested. That is where the noise of a civil war comes in, a conflict, saying when you have to use remedies to restore legitimacy. What do I mean? It means kicking people out of, if people lose an election, they may have to be taken out by whatever the local marshals are, and the rightful heir puts into place, so the rightful elected person put in place. It could be so strong that they don't allow it. There could be shadow governments. I mean, I've seen this all over the world. We've watched this all over the world. And Americans just really want to play in this game. I don't know why. I'm going to say the egregor wants it. And so you have to get rid of where do you want to be in it. But then we can have a civil war. But this relentless holy war has been continuous. I don't care if you call it the satanic panic of the 80s, the delegitimizing us and not allowing us to get media access in the 90s. People forget that. Trying not to recognize our veterans. We had to fight for that. How about the prisons? Patrick McCollum. The prisons and getting our people to have prison ministries. That's a big change. Especially as prisons have grown. Right? How many places have we fought to make sure we're legitimate? We've done a really good job. But we've had to fight for these rights that should be innate. That's it, right? And one of the arguments I hear constantly, we have the First Amendment. Rights are only as good as the people who are willing to enforce them, and they are only as good as the willingness to defend them. And they are as bad as people who will use them against you. They will attack you and say you don't have the legitimate right, period. And in the First Amendment is where almost all pagan authority in the United States come from. And I said authority. It's a definite word. I know people don't like it, but it is where we have our authority to say, you can't affect us. We have to have this sort of power, the authority. The First Amendment is where we sit. So let me break it down. I'm going to give it to you in a minute. We are, no matter what else is out there, we are under attack by spiritual warriors such as the Lord, and across many different churches, and there are many spiritual, anti-spiritual churches, and the large ones, and calling out. Also, we're seeing a legitimate movement of the holy war into our high schools, with Turning Point, the threat to paganism, and so we're seeing this absolute commitment to pushing paganism not into the prisons, not into camps, but out of the mainstream eye. That's right. This holy war right now is to push pagans into quiet compliance, so that when we have to exert our authority to our rights, they will have damaged a lot of the structures that we need to use that we ignored. So we are fighting a holy war by Christian Dominionists, and we're the targets. Whether we fight back or not is beside the point. These conquerors, these people who are seeking to conquer, they are the same color of soul. They're the same color of soul as the Crusaders. They're the same color as the Inquisition. Dark, ugly souls who believe they have every legitimate right to do so. And so does Gaia. I mean, Gaia's pitting a very ruthless community against a nicer, softer community. So, and from that point of view, we can get into real discussions about that mind. But accept the fact that you're being targeted, no matter what you think, directly and indirectly, to have your mouth shut. And that's the holy war. The other two, we'll see what happens. But that battle has been going on for a very long time. You know how long? Since the 70s. But this one, the super struggle and the clash of civilizations, the way we make wealth, socialism collision with the future, a collision of constituencies, principles for a third wave America. 1994, right? I remember this, and let me see if I got my page. There it is. You are the revolutionist dead. You are the men. You are the men and women, the farmers, merchants, and artisans, lawyers, printers, pamphleteers, shopkeepers, and soldiers who together created a new nation on the distant shores of America. Yeah. And this is the statement they're saying. This argument is that, boom, we need to change civilization. We need to become more modern. Technology and everything else. So what's happening today is a continuation of it. So understand, we're being not just attacked in other sort of ways, fascism and all that, but underneath it all is to limit our knowledge, limit our education, to begin molding the next generation into a more Christian nation. Simple. So that, my friends, is what the difference between a rebellion, a civil war, right, and what we really are facing underneath all of this is a holy war. I'll be back with more about this in the future. Be safe, be strong, speak your truth. Until